Hi, my name's Jeffrey Olsen. I'm an international best-selling author, I'm a public speaker, I'm a creative director, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and I'm a friend. I grew up on a little family farm. My parents divorced, and I spent my young years with my mother, but soon went to live with my father. And it was a single dad and 3 boys in a rough and tumble lifestyle out in the country. We had cows and horses and chickens and pigs. It was a family farm operation. And I loved it. It was an awesome way to grow up. We were very athletic, me and my brothers. It was a family of all boys. And I ended up going away to college to play football at Utah State, Division I University. And in that process, I fell madly, hopelessly, head over heels in love. Yeah, this young woman walked into the room. I didn't even know her name, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. It's like, wow, there she is. It was beyond love at first sight. It was a knowing. It was a recognition, even though I'd never met her, didn't know her name. Her name was Tamara, and gosh, that turned into a friendship, which turned into a courtship, which turned into a marriage. We were married, and she was pursuing her career as a high school teacher. I was pursuing my career in marketing and advertising as a creative person. And about 3 years into that marriage, we had our first baby boy, a beautiful, healthy young man, and we called him Spencer, which was Tamara's maiden name, and we gave it as his first name, just to honor that part of the family. Yeah, it took almost 6 years to get our second son here. We had some complications, but finally this miracle boy came. 2 boys, Spencer, Griffin, and it was this happy little family, me pursuing my career, Tamara pursuing her career, and both of us co-parenting and doing all we could to raise a family. I was the rough and tumble dad in many ways. I mean, Spencer and I would run and play and fly kites, and gosh, we fished. I remember fishing with him on a backpack on my back. You know, we would go out and we would spend time that way. Griffin was all boy. I mean, man, even changing his diaper was like a wrestling match. He was also colicky. He had belly aches at night, and Tamara, with her teaching career, had to be up very early and to class to take care of the high school students, and so often I would be up at night with Griffin, holding him, soothing him, talking to him, and wow, I would lift him up on my hand, you know, and hold him to put some pressure on his belly, and we would he'd lay on my chest often. I would lay down on the floor because I was dead tired too, and he would lay on my chest, just putting pressure on his belly, and I would rub his back. And at the time, it's like, wow, you know, I'm just not getting a lot of sleep. But in hindsight, what beautiful miracle moments to just be in the stillness of those wee hours of the morning, 2, 3, 4 a.m., holding my son, being with him, watching him sleep, and just connecting heart to heart right there. We had gone on a family vacation. We had gone down to southern Utah. It was a road trip. We loaded the family in the car and put everything in there. We went to visit her parents and her grandparents and spend time with them. It was the Easter holiday, so we visited, we celebrated Easter, we did all the traditional things in our family. You know, we hard-boiled eggs and put the eggs in coloring and hid them in the garden for the kids to go find on Easter morning. We made little Easter baskets, and it was really a beautiful day. I mean, the kids got up, and little Griffin, who was just a toddler, he was just barely standing up and, you know, taking a few steps and falling down and doing what toddlers do. And he was all about these colored eggs. I mean, he was out in the garden finding them, and he would stand up, take a couple steps, fall down, crawl, you know, bringing the egg, and he would hold it up, and he was only saying a few words, but he would say, "Dad, ball." He thought the colored eggs were balls. And Spencer was all about the baskets. He was all about, where's the baskets, where are the baskets? And I'd climbed up and hit him in a tree. I'd put him in a tree, and when he saw that, he went up and got the baskets and came down, and wow, he was mesmerized by the little action figures he got, and just certain things about Easter that was not just tradition, but it was magical. It was magical that morning as we spent time just doing what families do. Yeah, Tamara was all about breakfast. She was in with her mother making bacon and eggs and pancakes and the big family breakfast. And we had breakfast on Sunday. We visited, we played cards and had games into the night. We put the kids to bed and stayed up into the night speaking with her parents. And Monday morning came and it was time to go home. I mean, I was missing a day of work. It was about a 5-hour drive. And we got up and we loaded everybody in the car. I put all the bags in the car and buckled the kids in their car seats, and we said our goodbyes and we jumped into the car to head home. And I'll always remember this. I mean, we got in the car and there's her parents, Grandma and Grandpa, waving on the porch the way they do. And I put the car in drive and I just began to pull away from the curb, and Tamara said, "Stop, wait." I thought she had forgotten something. So I stopped the car and she looked at me and she said, "I need to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." Now in that moment I thought, oh, women, we've said goodbye, let's get on the road. But I watched, I stopped the car and I watched as she jumped out. She ran up on the porch and she not only hugged them, but she kissed them both. And I noticed that. I noticed how she hugged and kissed her mom and dad. And then she turned around and came back into the car and jumped in and buckled up. And we were off. Now, in a normal, chain of events, that wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But given the way that day played out, that was literally the last goodbye. She must have heard a whisper or had an impression or just a feeling. I want to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time. And she acted on it. She acted on it. When we get those impressions, when we have those feelings, those little intuitions, act on them. Act on them. So everyone's buckled back into the car. I put the car in drive. I head for the interstate. I crank it up to 75 miles an hour, which is as fast as I could legally go. I set the cruise control and we're away. We're off. We're driving, and I'm driving up the road. I'm racing. I'm thinking about all the things I've got to do. I'm watching traffic now and then. But there was this one moment on the drive where I looked in the rearview mirror just to check traffic. I mean, it was a moment. It was just a moment. But I peeked in the rearview mirror. And as I looked to check traffic, Griffin caught my eye. This little boy, this miracle boy that took so long to get here. And I noticed he had fallen sound asleep in his car seat. Sound asleep. I noticed, even at a glance, how his hands laid. I noticed details. I noticed how long his eyelashes were, and I thought, what a beautiful kid. I mean, what a miracle boy. And here he was, here in our family, in the car seat, sleeping. And then I heard Spencer, our 7-year-old, and he was playing with action figures. The action figures he got in his Easter basket. He's playing them behind me, and I hear all the noise of a brilliant little boy, having the greatest lightsaber battle in the universe. And I was filled with such joy, like, wow, 2 healthy, whole children. And then I looked over at Tamara, and she had also reclined her seat back and was sound asleep. She and Griffin were sleeping. But as I looked at her sleeping, she was still holding on to my hand. And I thought, wow, we're 10 years into a marriage, 2 kids, we're juggling career and family, and yet she's still holding on to my hand. Just like she did when I had a couple extra bucks in college and took her to a $1 movie. I thought, what a blessing to have her right here holding my hand. It was just pure moment of gratitude, like, wow, look what I'm surrounded with. Look what I've got. It was about an hour after that when everything played out. There was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a red pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. The most difficult part of telling this story is I believe I may have dozed off at the wheel. I believe I may have just nodded off, swerved to the right, overcorrected to the left, and then lost control of the vehicle, and it began to roll. Not off the road, but down the road at 75 miles per hour, propelled by that concrete. It was a horrific accident. The reports say the car rolled no less than 6 to 8 times. I blacked out for the actual rolling. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And in fact, the first thing I heard was Spencer, my 7-year-old, crying in the back seat. You know, here I've got this 7-year-old hysterically crying. As a father, I thought, I got to get to him. I've got to get to my boy. But that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was all the broken glass. And I was unaware of my injuries. I had severe injuries. Both legs had been crushed. My back had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off. The seat belt had cut through me. I was unaware of the injuries. All I knew is my son's crying and I've got to get to my boy. But that's when the brutal reality hit that no one else was crying, and I was aware at the scene that both Griffin and Tamara were gone. They were killed instantly in the accident. And that's about the worst hell a man can be in. I mean, here I have this hysterical 7-year-old I can't get to. I know half the family's gone. I'm losing consciousness. And I was driving the car. The guilt, the regret. I kept thinking, can't I get those 3 seconds back? What happened? What happened? It was in that darkness, that terror, that horror of what had just taken place that light came. Light literally came. It's like light surrounded me. Light was comforting me in this horrible, drastic situation. And it felt as if I was rising above the accident scene, like I was being lifted up above the accident scene. And suddenly I could breathe fine. I was incredibly conscious. I was more alive than I've ever been, and I had no pain. I was thinking, how can I possibly be okay? And while I'm in the light, just getting my bearings of what's happening, Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she's in this light with me, and she's gorgeous. There's no injuries. She's beautiful. She's radiant, and she begins to communicate with me. She begins to communicate, saying, "Jeff, you can't stay. You can't come. You've got to go back. You've got to go back." And we had this intense and profound conversation about if I stayed with her, Spencer, our 7-year-old, would be orphaned. And we literally, we made a deal. For whatever reason, she couldn't come back, but she was emphatic, "Jeff, you've got to go back. You've got to go." And we chose. We decided that I would come back, that I would come back. Now, I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And our thoughts are so powerful. I didn't have to figure out, how do I go back? It was in the intention. It was the thought. I'm going back. I'm going back. And then it was like whoosh, like suddenly I'm moving about a busy level 1 trauma room. I'm in an ER hospital, and I have no concept of time. You know, in this bubble of light, in this conversation. I later found out people arrived at the scene. Spencer, my 7-year-old, he was banged up a little bit. He had bruised his ribs, he had broken his wrist, but he physically walked away from the accident. I had to be extricated from the car. With my injuries, I had to be life-flighted to a level 1 trauma center. I had no idea of any of that. I knew I'd crashed the car. I'd had this profound exchange with Tamara. I'd made a choice. I came back, and suddenly I'm wandering around the hospital, seeing the doctors and the patients and the families of the patients and the nurses. And it was like I had 360-degree awareness of everything that was going on. And everyone I saw, I knew them perfectly. I mean, I knew them perfectly. I knew their love, their hate, their motivations, their challenges, their thoughts. It's like they were me and I was them. There was a oneness. There was this profound, almost divine connection. It's like, wow. There was a nurse that brushed by me and they were unaware of me, but I was very aware of them. I mean, in an instant, I knew her whole life. I almost experienced the abuse, the abuse that she'd received as a child. And yet in that same instant, it's like, wow, look at her. Look at her magnificence. She's here in a hospital, serving, healing, helping. It was true of everyone I saw. Everyone I saw, I felt this profound connection. I was them and they were me and we were connected. We were one and there was this unconditional love. I was seeing their magnificence and I knew I'm seeing them as the divine sees them. I'm seeing them as God sees them. And I wandered about the hospital having this experience until I came to a body I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was odd. So I stepped closer and looked, and that's when I realized, oh my gosh, that's me. It wasn't me. I was having this profound, connected oneness experience, but there was my body. There was the skin suit. There was the flesh that I had been going through life in. And I'm looking at it and it's so broken. It's so horribly broken. And I had this profound moment of awareness, this reverence for the body. It's like, wow, our bodies truly are temples. I mean, I never had to remind my heart to beat or think about drawing breath in my lungs or teaching my eyes to see. I was seeing the body as this magnificent miracle machine. And I knew I've got to get back in it. I've got to get back in the body or back with the body. I've got to reconnect here. And mine's so broken. And again, our thoughts. I didn't have to figure out, well, how do I reconnect? How do I do this? In the thought, in the intention, boom. Then I'm back in the body. Or back with the body. I mean, but the heaviness. I mean, the pain, the trauma, the remorse, the guilt, the regret. I mean, I was badly physically broken, but that was nothing compared to the emotional despair that half the family was gone and I was driving the car. Yeah, the hospital was rough. I learned a whole new meaning to the words, be still. I had no choice. My legs were immobile, my arm was immobile. They eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at all the equipment. I was intubated, the machine doing the breathing for my lungs. And it was traumatic. I was in the hospital for 5.5 months. I mean, there was 18 surgeries in all to put me back together. But I learned a lot. My family was there. My brothers were there. My brothers practically lost their jobs to come and sit with me and look after me. And I experienced a lot in the hospital that not only reconnected me to myself and my family, but reconnected me to maybe that divine part of us that I wouldn't have recognized had this not happened. The most profound thing that happened in the hospital was at the end of my hospital stay. And it's worth pointing out the most profound out-of-body or near-death experiences were at the scene of the accident, before morphine or narcotics had been administered. And then at the end of my hospital stay, I was out of ICU, I was out of surgical recovery, I was actually in the rehabilitation wing of the hospital. I was off of all the heavy narcotics. And I was only weeks away from going home. And I laid down one night and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Now, I had laid so long on my back, I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head with all the injuries to the abdomen. They'd finally stabilized those so I could lay on my side, and I was naturally sleeping on my side, which is the way I sleep. And I fell into this deep, beautiful sleep. And while I was sleeping, I felt that light come, the same light as at the accident, that light that comes and comforts and holds. And I had been in such grief. I mean, I'd just been tormented about the family and my little Griffin and what had happened. And I was in that state as this light came, almost comforting me in the grief. And again, it felt like I was rising above the hospital bed. And this time the light, it like dispensed, it went away, and I was in the most incredible, beautiful place. People say heaven or the spirit world or the other side. The only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. This place was so familiar, so welcoming, and I was whole. I had both legs and both feet, and I began to run. I began to run joyfully, thinking I'm home and I'm whole and I'm healed. And it was an interesting experience. It felt so physical. Like I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my calves and thighs. And I'm having this profound experience. And then I got the message, I'm not here to stay. And at that time, there was like this corridor to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. I'm to go down that corridor, and I began to do so. And as I did, I realized at the end of the corridor was a crib. Now Griffin, my toddler, he was still sleeping in a crib at the time of the accident. He was only 14 months old. And I was intrigued by this crib, and so I rushed to the crib. And when I looked in, there was my Griffin, there was my little boy, sleeping as peacefully and as beautifully as when I glanced in the rearview mirror. And again, the details were there. I'm like, wow, look at him. Look how he breathes. Look how long his eyelashes are. And I swept up my little boy, and I held him. And that felt physical. I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child, but there's a heat and a weight to it. And I picked him up, and I could feel him against me, and I could feel him breathing. I could feel his breath on my neck. And I leaned over, and I smelled his hair. And I'm like, it's my boy. And I begin to weep. I'm like, I'm holding my child. And at that time, I'm feeling this presence come up behind me. There's this overwhelming, powerful, cosmic, wise presence coming up behind me. And I'm holding my son, and I'm weeping. And I begin to have those guilt feelings again of, man, he's here because I crashed the car. You know, his life was cut so short because I overcorrected, I lost control, and this presence is coming closer and closer, and I'm feeling these feelings of guilt, and I'm holding my child, and given my upbringing, I'm thinking, that's God, and I'm in so much trouble. I'm in so much trouble. I crashed the car, and my son is here. He passed away. And I had this thought. I had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And by that time, the presence is right there, and the thought of, wow, forgiveness. And in that thought, these divine arms wrapped around and just held us. Just held me and my little boy. That almost felt physical. These arms just wrapped, and then it's like the lid just came off. I mean, there was this download of love, of trust, of this divine purity, and the communication. It wasn't even words. It was just like into my whole being, as I had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven, was there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in pure divine order. And I thought, how can that be? My little boy's here. And I began to see my life play out before my eyes, the life review, if you will. And I'm seeing my life, and I'm seeing my parents' divorce, and I'm seeing the insecurities that created in me, and I'm seeing how I overcompensated for those, gosh, get the grade, make the team, all the things that were driving me. And I'm looking at my life, and I'm saying, wow, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And yet in these divine arms, it was communicated, what did you learn? There was all this love. There was no judgment. It's like, what did you learn in that moment? What did you learn by that so-called mistake? And I'm looking at my life, I'm seeing the love of my brothers and our connectedness and the love of the family. I'm seeing these things. I saw things and I thought, well, that was wrong. I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway. And here I was judging it, but in these divine arms, it was communicated, well, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. You are as beloved, you are as divine, you're as perfect as that child you hold. And it was magnified. Like, here I'm holding my little boy, and to me, he is perfect, he is divine, he is beloved. And it was a very personal experience, but I knew it radiated out to every living soul. Like, wow, we are so loved. I am so loved. I watched my life with no judgment. I was judging it, but the divine held me in such peace and power of, yeah, look at what you learned. Look at what you've come to. Look at what you've experienced. And I had a tutorial on choice. In all this love, I mean, it was communicated to me. It was odd. The communication was, I want you to have your will. Now, I was raised in a conservative Christian home. No, it's God's will be done, not mine. And here was the divine, or God, if you will, saying, I want you to have your will. And I'm like, no, 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 it's your will be done. And what was communicated to me is, my will is your will. That's how much you're loved. My will is that you have free will. You get to choose. And I'm holding my child and I'm thinking, how? Why? And it was communicated, you can give your child. You can choose to give Griffin back and trust. And therefore your will be exercised. You know, you can be mad at God your whole life because this was allowed to happen. You can beat yourself up the rest of your life because you were driving the car, but in this perfect, beautiful, divine moment, you can make a choice to give your son back, to hand him over, and to trust in the divine. And therefore, you're exercising your will. Nothing's been snatched from you. You're literally giving. And in all that beauty, and in all that peace and power and love, I kissed my little boy, and I handed him back. I gave him to God. And then I woke up or came to myself. Suddenly I'm back in the hospital bed, back to the amputation and the colostomy bag and the brace and the shoulder brace and all the things that were going on with a little different perspective. I mean, it's not like I had this horrible accident and had this profound out-of-body or near-death experience and then I was okay. No, I had a horrible accident. I had profound experiences. And I grieved like anyone would grieve. But there was some insights. There was some insights there that were not common. And I suppose that's what got me through. I mean, had I not had what happened happen, I mean, I might be that guy strung out on some corner wondering what happened. How did life end up here? But with this out-of-body experience, this near-death experience, this profound insight of the love of God, of not only what's divine out there, but what's divine in here. I mean, to be held by the divine and told you are divine. You get to choose. You are a manifestation of all there is. That was an interesting way to come back into this world. So in the arms of the divine, there was nothing to forgive. I was seeking forgiveness, but here everything appeared in perfect order. Here everything came down to my judgments of it, but there was no judgment there. There was only love. There was only divinity. There was only this peace of the process that was there to expand my soul. That, yeah, there was free will and choice, and I would experience the results of my choices, but there was no judgment of it, that I was literally here to learn. That the meaning of life was to learn. And I was learning by my experiences and then making adjustments and moving forward, but without judgment of the divine, simply being held in the love and beauty, just like a child. I mean, I wasn't judging Griffin when he'd fall down and slobber as a toddler. I was celebrating, like, look at my boy, he's learning to walk. And that's how I felt in the arms of God. It's like, wow, look at my children. They're learning to walk. They're realizing the divinity that lives within them. They're realizing the divine spark of who they are, that they're a manifestation of all there is, having their experience in this third dimensional human realm. And yet we're far more than human. We're divine, eternal beings, having a human experience so that we can learn. We can make choices. We can see the results of our choices and then make the adjustments moving forward. So coming home was an interesting experience. I'd been in the hospital for months. My left leg was amputated, my right leg's in a brace, my right arm's in a sling, and I'm driving an electric wheelchair with the one good hand that works and dealing with a colostomy bag from the ruptured intestines. I was quite a sight. Again, my family, my brothers, they would have to literally pick me up and put me into the electric wheelchair. But it was time to go home. And I wasn't going home to my own house. I was going to my brother's house where he had been looking after my son Spencer. And the day came and we're driving there home. And I began to really worry about how Spencer going to deal with this. I mean, he had certainly come to see me in the hospital. But now I was, we were going home, like we were going onto his turf. And I was contemplating this all the way along the drive. And we got to the house. And, I looked and there's Spencer looking, he's looking out the window watching his uncles, my brothers, literally pick me up and put me in the wheelchair. And I began to navigate toward the house thinking, how's he going to accept this? The rough and tumble dad now badly broken. Also the emotional trauma he's going through. I mean, although I had been in the arms of God and told there's nothing to forgive, I hadn't forgiven myself. I'm still like, wow, look what's created. Look at the results of what's happened. And how's Spencer ever going to deal with this? And as I'm beginning to drive the wheelchair toward the ramp that my brothers had built to get me in the house, Spencer came running out of the house and he ran toward me, but he went right past me. And I thought, I knew this was too much. I knew all of this was too much. It's just, he'll never accept me like this. And I certainly don't accept myself like this. And I began to move forward and, I was navigating to turn the wheelchair to go up the ramp. And as I turned, I just looked to see where he went. I just looked, and as I peeked over my shoulder, I realized he'd actually run across the street. And he started to knock on all the neighbors' doors. And he was shouting, come out, my dad has made it home. Come and see my dad. And I realized my judgments were not his judgments. And as he made the circle and he ran and jumped on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures and everything from the abdominal repair. But I held him in that moment, and I had a profound realization. Here I was in a wheelchair, broken, holding my surviving son in this realm. And it was no less divine than holding my son who had passed in the arms of God in that realm. Suddenly heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. There was nothing to do. It was to simply be in that profound divine moment and feel his love and realize that we had this divine connection. And we were going to navigate this together. We were going to do it together. Now, it took years for me to ever forgive myself. I mean, I was fitted with a prosthetic limb. I learned to walk. They were able to fix all the intestinal stuff and put me back together. I got back to work, and I still struggled. Even though I had been in the arms of God and told there's nothing to forgive and saw these insights in my life, I hadn't forgiven myself. I mean, we are so rough on ourselves. It's easy for me to forgive others, but boy, forgiving myself was a challenge. I went for years. And now I can look back and say, okay, there was all this external validation. The families forgave me. It's like, well, yeah, you were driving and we forgive you, we love you. I'm even in the arms of God. I'm held by the divine and told there's nothing to forgive, all is in order. But that was all from the outside coming in. It wasn't until from the inside going out, when I decided deep within myself to let go, to forgive myself, to move forward, that's when the healing began. That's when I was able to finally feel whole. Even though the body was broken, the heart began to heal. And forgiving myself began to heal my soul and move me forward in a way that was much different than carrying that bag of stones that felt like a heavy, heavy burden to bear. You know, even though I had felt forgiven by the divine and I worked to forgive myself, I mean, forgiveness is an ongoing day-to-day thing. I mean, I screw things up every day. You know, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I could have handled that differently. And rather than beating ourselves up, maybe we can just look at it. Maybe I can look at those things I do or I say, or I wish I'd have done that differently, or oh, I wish that didn't happen. Or maybe there's something drastic. It's like, wow, that was a bad choice. That was a bad choice. Or maybe it was just a choice that didn't work. You know, maybe it wasn't the wrong choice or the bad choice. Maybe we did the best we could in that moment, in that time. But letting go a little bit, being a little easier on ourselves, I mean, taking an accountable look, like, okay, what did I not want to see, and what did I ignore, and what did I assume, and maybe what did I flat out deny about the situation. But showing some self-kindness, some self-compassion, some things where we can hold the space to forgive on an ongoing basis. It's a day-to-day thing for me. Wow. All right. I'm laying down to go to bed. Let me think through this day. Could have handled that different. Could have done that differently. Well, that worked, but those two things didn't work. And yet that's what we're here to do. Self-evaluate, improve, work on, realizing we're a divine soul. We're a divine soul having a human experience. The humanality of it is that's part of it. The humanness of it, that's part of it. It's like that's why we came. We came to experience what's not love, that we might fully embrace love. We came to experience what's not divine, that we might fully embrace our divinity and the divinity of others. And yeah, we're going to botch it up every now and then, but get up, dust yourself off, have some self-kindness, and move forward, having learned. I often think of the famous quote by the Master. Love your neighbor as yourself. Wow. Well, if I don't love myself, how can I possibly love my neighbor? If I don't forgive myself, how can I possibly forgive someone else? I mean, if it starts with me, then self-love and self-forgiveness ripples out to everyone else. That's where it begins and that's where it ends, is in our self-love and our self-forgiveness. And what does it mean to love oneself? I mean, how do you define that? First of all, we must know oneself. We learn that by experience too. To show compassion for oneself, that's a big part of loving yourself. Actually, to look at all the things we call imperfect, whether that's in our body or our countenance or in decisions, and realize maybe there's perfection in the chaos. Maybe that uniqueness that is me is such a profound divine expression of that perhaps I carry a tone, a vibration that no one else can. In this big, wide universe, this uni, this one verse, this one song, maybe I have a melody, maybe I have a tone, maybe I have a note that only I can sing. And the universe is not complete without it. And that uniqueness does not make me less than or unworthy. That uniqueness makes me unique. It makes me a divine, unique expression of all there is. And I can love that. I can love that, and if I'm different, then that's beautiful. It would be so boring if we were all the same. I mean, we all have a unique tone, a unique note, a unique song, and that's what creates the harmony. That's what creates the harmony that is the beauty of the universe and this existence too. Yeah, Spencer never had a near-death experience. He didn't have an out-of-body experience. He went through this whole thing as an innocent 7-year-old child. And he had a lot of things to work through growing up and adolescence. And wow, Dad, how come you got that and I didn't? If there's some divine, greater power, did it not care about me? I begged to see Mom. I begged to have these feelings. And yet Spencer's turned out amazing. That's just it. We all have different journeys. We all have different paths. And my journey was perfect for my soul's expansion. His journey was perfect for his soul's expansion. Spencer married a delightful woman, Ashley, and they recently had a child, a little boy. And so I'm a grandfather now, and I've watched Spencer grow into this compassionate man who's married a brilliant woman, and now he's a father with a young family. He's the age now that I was when the accident happened. I was a young man. And watching him do that and living vicariously almost through him as he raises his boy and they move on. It's like everything's a cycle, everything's an eternal round, and I can influence that little boy, I've influenced my son, but really, quite honestly, they influence me. I think sometimes they're older souls. They showed up to walk me home. They showed up with power and insights to walk me home as I had my experience and made choices and moved forward myself. How do I define God? Well, God's in everything. God's in all of us. I mean, to look in the mirror and see divinity, that's the biggest challenge for me, but to see God in everyone. I grew up in a conservative Christian home. I was reading the Bible one day. This was after the near-death experience. This was after everything has happened. This was not that long ago. And I was reading the Beatitudes. I was reading the Beatitudes, and it's not that I'm here to change the Bible, but I read that verse that said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And it's like this voice just spoke right to my soul. In fact, it was like a vision. It's like I was watching that happen. And it said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God in everything and in everyone." And that's how I feel. We are all a manifestation of God. God is a manifestation of us in many ways. I don't know that I embrace a guy with a white beard sitting on a cloud somewhere, but I embrace the divinity in everything, in all of creation. Now, I was held in the arms of what felt like a divine being, a God, a figure that held me, and I embraced that. But I also realized that there's divinity in everything. It's like I am that I am. And so are you, and so are you, and so are you, and so are you. We're all unique manifestations of God, and therefore, collectively, we are that. My soul wants me to remember, to literally remember, to come here and pick up the pieces and put it all together into wholeness and remember who I am. My grandfather used to say this to me, remember who you are. My father says that to me, remember who you are. To remember, to pick up all those pieces. I mean, we literally came down and came apart to experience something that we're not. And yet we can pick up the pieces and remember who we are, that the soul was never damaged. No matter what happened, no matter what you've done or what's been done to you, nothing can damage that eternal soul. The soul wants me to remember that you are whole. You are whole and worthy and healthy and healed and divine, just as you are. Right now, right here, in this very moment, we are divinity. We're manifestations of divinity, and my soul cries that out. You are love. You came from love, you are love, you're a manifestation of love, and forever will be. Nothing can change that. It's who I am. It's who we all are. My father recently passed away, 90 years old, never been to the hospital, healthy, independent, and he got ill. It was complications from diabetes, and in 3 weeks he was gone. He was gone. He left this realm. But it was interesting to watch him. It was also interesting to watch his life as he remembered. My dad was a hard man. I mean, you know, lieutenant colonel in the Army, cowboy. He was a hard man. You know, you didn't show emotions. You were never vulnerable. And yet I watched my father in his old age become very tender, very kind, very generous. And in those last days that he was alive, well, it was interesting. You know, we'd talked and he would have, I mean, he was quite coherent. He never really lost consciousness except the day before he passed. But the last day we gathered, it was me and my brothers. We were all in the room with him. And we were talking. And we knew the end was near, so we said, Dad, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? And he looked at us, he said, you know, today, he said, I think I just want to listen. You guys talk and I'll just listen. And he smiled while we recounted memories and things from our childhood and things from our adulthood. But as he said, I want to talk less. I'm not going to talk, I'm just going to listen. That's a big takeaway from me. It's like, wow, I just want to shut my mouth and listen more. Just listen more and see what I can learn. It's amazing what you hear when you're quiet and when you're still and when you simply open your ears and open your heart to listen. Yeah, I believe, in fact, I hold very dear that we have soul connections, we have soul contracts. I believe I chose my dad to be my dad, that somewhere in some cosmic realm I said, hey, let's go do that, and you be the father and I'll be the son. And I watched my dad, and like I mentioned, he was a hard man. I mean, my dad taught me many things. He taught me I better be there first with the most, and I better win more than I lose. And you know, he was a driven man. But he also taught me honesty. He taught me to tell the truth. He taught me to be, you know, to have integrity, to be my word, to do what I say and say what I do. And that was the biggest takeaway. And I think that was a contract in his hardness. Had my dad been soft, I wouldn't have learned those things. Now, there was times I looked at my dad and thought, oh, I don't want to be like that. Boy, I'm going to be different than that. I'm going to be more kind. I'm going to be more, you know, compassionate. And I made those choices, and yet those choices were made in perhaps seeing his, you know, not kind sometimes, or what I thought could be more kind. And it's all in perfect order. In the end, I honor my dad. He held a context where he demanded our excellence, and he would accept nothing less. And that was hard, but that was brilliant. That was all based in love. And to watch him become kind and become compassionate in his old age, that was a beautiful process. It was a beautiful process to see that. And I suppose at the end of the day, I realized that's always who he was. It was kindness and compassion that said, I demand your excellence, and do it over again if it's not, you know, if it's not good enough. Your best won't do. I demand your excellence. And had I not had that as a father, I'm not sure where I'd be. And that's a soul contract. That's the agreement. That's what we came here to experience and do and to play out, and it's played out perfectly. It's played out beautifully.